Hey Acers, welcome to this week's Ace Role Playing Games long-form post. I'm glad to be here with you. I'm always glad to, even though I don't get to actually see your faces, I'm going to talk to you like you were here. I'm going to try and bring in the energy that I really do have for role-playing games, and I'm going to try and continue to improve these. So, today I want to talk about something that just happened, and in January, role playing gaming as an industry, as a thing, turned 50. Now, we've been playing as human beings, we've been role playing our whole existence because that's how we as children learn to handle adult problems. Think about all the times your sister wanted to play house, or you wanted to play house. You might be the sister, or you might be a brother that wanted to play house. But even so, you were modeling real life events in a pretend way, in a safe way. And that's what role playing games really are, and always have been. Well, in January, Dungeons and Dragons, which came out in January of 1974, turned 50. And I want to take a moment to honor what Dungeons and Dragons has done for all of us. And that I would start by saying Dungeons and Dragons gave us a chance to get together and live for a little bit as a hero in a fantastical realm. Now, would Dungeons and Dragons have happened without Tolkien? I doubt it. I doubt very much that had Tolkien not published The Lord of the Rings, which in its turn was a compilation and a mashing together of a whole bunch of other different mythologies and things like that. Tolkien took Finnish mythology. He took Indian, Hindu mythology. He took all the different mythologies from around the world, and he made a myth for England. And in the 60s, there was a big resurgence of interest in his work because Tolkien published The Hobbit starting, that was 1936. And you can even go back further to when he was in the trenches of World War I, and he was coming up with the ideas that would become the Elvish language that he so adored. And that's, of course, also based on Finnish and other things like that. And there's some Sanskrit in there. It's just so much is based on linguistics, but it extrapolated itself in his mind, and he put it together. And then when he wrote The Hobbit, which incidentally comes from his little habit that he had of writing down, "In a hole in the ground lived a hobbit." That's what he wrote on the back of a student's essay. And then he stopped and went, well, what is a hobbit? Because if you look at things like the Oxford English Dictionary that he did make contributions to, and even the book of Old Norse, there's a English to Old Norse dictionary that he helped edit, and he gets a special call out in the beginning of it, and it's a hard book to get. If you can find a copy of it, it's rather expensive because they haven't reprinted it, but it was still really cool. Anyway, Tolkien takes all the stuff that was out here before and he brings it in and he makes it his own as well. And that's what creative people do. When we are creative, we're not coming up with something fresh and new, whole cloth, all in our minds. Or we might, that's fine too. But usually, even if we don't acknowledge it, there is a source to the way we think about things. And so he creates this universe and tells the story of the Hobbit. When his publishers come to him and say, holy cow, this book that you wrote for children, which was kind of a hard slog to get the Hobbit going, because in 1936 when someone said, yeah, this would be a good book for ages like 8 to 12, they missed an entire audience almost. But the grown-ups did start reading it. Just like I did as a grown-up with Harry Potter. I had seen the first couple books come out, didn't know that my uncle was involved in the publishing of the American side of it, and didn't know that he was the one that recommended Scholastic that they published that one, and which in turn caused so many sales that Rowling finished the series in England, and then it got brought over here with Scholastic. Anyway, I just think it's cool that Tolkien took all that knowledge he had and he condensed it down into something that he owned, that was his story. And then the publisher comes and says, hey, we want a Hobbit Part 2. And that's when he realized, no, this is taking my world. This was already my world. Even though I wasn't thinking about it when I wrote The Hobbit, this was already the world that I had created. And so he filed some edges around in The Hobbit. He kind of tweaked a few things, especially in the later versions of The Hobbit, where he could get it to better align with Lord of the Rings. And Lord of the Rings comes out and takes the world by storm to a degree, but not as big as when you fast forward to the 60s and you get the hippies reading it on college campuses. That's really when the influence on role-playing games comes about, and it influences, along with other fantasy writers who caught it in the 50s originally and then again in the 60s or 70s. They caught this and they wrote their own stuff. Paul Anderson wrote some stuff, or Paul, however you want to say his name, but Paul Anderson wrote some stuff that was fantasy. And then there are a few other fantasy things that Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson directly acknowledge as inspirations for what becomes Dungeons and Dragons. Now, Dungeons and Dragons, it comes out and it actually sells out. It keeps selling and selling and selling. And obviously, it's done with its ups and downs pretty darn well. It has done really well for 50 years to still be around. A hobby game that was based initially on rules for miniatures battles. And then Gygax and Arneson, almost independently of each other and then getting together, they said, well, what's the story of this wizard? What's the story of this elf? And they put together this Dungeons and Dragons thing using the chainmail rules for combat. And that's why the miniatures battle stuff, the chainmail rules, are part of the reason why we have hit points. Now, I've actually chatted with a good buddy of mine who is a diehard D&D fan. He thinks that D&D still is the end-all be-all of a lot of role-playing games out there, and he doesn't play many others. And he pointed out that hit points really aren't just how much damage a person can take. Hit points also represent their cool, their ability to persevere. And he pointed it out this way. He said if James Bond was made into a D&D character, James Bond would probably have 1,000 hit points, because it's not just his physical ability to take damage. That's covered in Constitution. But hit points cover everything else. That je ne sais quoi of a character in D&D. Now, hit points represented at the time of chainmail how many units you're losing from that, or how much damage that unit of soldiers is taking. Then you get the hit points on the characters. And so there are, like any good product, the product was clay. And it initially came out as a lump of clay, maybe vaguely shaped. But through additions and adding to and taking away from things, and changes that happen in further editions, and the supplements that came out for it, and the dungeons and the adventures that kept coming out for it, Dungeons and Dragons went through several molding phases and got closer and closer to the 5th edition we've all been playing. Now, I'm certain that I'm certain that Wizards of the Coast, and therefore Hasbro, is going to come out with something good this year, something that's going to be a big show killer and something great like that. I mean, I thought last year, if they were wise, if they were really wise, they never would have done the shenanigans they did last year in January to begin with. They wouldn't have screwed around with the OGL. They wouldn't have screwed around with the SRD stuff. They wouldn't have screwed around with the people who have been, yes, they've been making money off creating things for Dungeons and Dragons, but they were contributing to the world as a whole. If Wizards of the Coast had been wise, they would have told their Hasbro people, just watch what we do, and we're going to make you guys money this year. And they wouldn't have had to raise the prices either on the upcoming manuals. Am I going to buy, if they put out like a all-comprehensive set of all the rules of all the main editions, the player's guides, the monsters manuals, and the DM's guides, if they had put all that into one big set of volumes, like a 3-volume set, here's all the player's guides, here's all the monsters manuals, and here's all the DM's guides, if they had put all of that together, including the basic editions and all that kind of stuff, If they put all that together in like one big box set volume and charged $500 for it, I would have saved up this year and bought that. I would have said, take my money. I want to get this because this is a cool commemorative 50th anniversary thing. I would have done it. I would have done it in a heartbeat. So, Hasbro, you screwed us up. You screwed this whole thing up. And that's the thing, is that we watched TSR screw it up. And by the time Wizards of the Coast bought them in 1997, TSR was almost a dead thing. D&D was almost dead. But then Wizards of the Coast buys them in 97. Then in 99, Hasbro buys Wizards of the Coast. Before they can even get their first thing really out. And in 2000, we got 3rd edition. Now, 2nd edition was fun. I played a lot of 2nd edition before 3rd edition, obviously. And I jumped on it because at the time of the coming out of 3rd edition, in 2000, I was still very much in close contact with I was living with my role-playing game dealer that I bought from. And, it's one of those things that and I hope none of you turn to drugs, but if someone's a druggie and they're living with their dealer, there's no chance of them getting sober. So I was a role-playing game addict, and I was living with my dealer, and there was no chance of me getting over it. So I bought them as soon as I could because I actually bought them right at the tail end of them first coming out. I didn't have money much at that point. I was in college. I was broke. But I did get a chance to buy them when they were only $20 a book. So I've got all 3 of those books still back there. It's still my 3 original 3rd edition books. I didn't actually buy 3.5. That was when I was in my hiatus from role-playing games. I still thought about them, but I could never get a group together, things like that. Then 4 comes out, and I didn't buy 4 either. That was still a part of the hiatus period. But it was in 2003 that I first picked up Savage Worlds. And I thought, this is pretty cool. And because I had picked up in 98 the original Deadlands, and I didn't sadly get Great Rail Wars. I would almost want to see Pinnacle re-release it. But then again, there's probably not a good margin. I mean, there's barely a margin in the role-playing game industry itself. And there is a risk. And this is a risk that TSR took when they launched Dungeons & Dragons in 1974. And still a risk that every role-playing game manufacturer takes today. And that is a game group of 5 people technically only needs 1 book. Unless you split it into 3 like TSR and therefore Wizards has done along the course. And in the case of Savage Worlds, you only need 1 book because you can just keep handing it around to the group. And that's a risk. However, when you do cool things like do a 20th anniversary special set, like Pinnacle did last year with Savage Worlds. That was their 20th anniversary. And so what they did is they put out a special edition that has the ribbon bookmarks, which Pinnacle, bravo, I applaud you. That was one of the best decisions you possibly could have made. Keep those ribbons in the books. But they put that out, and it's a 5th printing with ribbons. And also, if you bought in on the 20th anniversary thing, you got 5 or you could get up to 5 players, depending on the level you bid at, or you supported at on Kickstarter. I got all 5 of the players' guides. So I can hand those out at the table, and I can keep a hold of mine to keep planning anything that I need to plan. And there are going to, and I even was able to buy in this time to get the Essentials box set, or whatever it's called, this time around. And I bought the original Essentials box set. I had to buy it separate after supporting the original purchase in 2018. So I was actually in a much better financial place this time. And that's something that Dungeons and Dragons should be doing. If they want to try, they had an 80% market share before last year. And then, as we've all jokingly said, they got D&D fanboys and girls to do something that nobody else has been able to do. And that was convince them to try another role-playing game system. And that's part of why other games came out. Tunnels and Trolls from Flying Buffalo Games came out because Saint Andre did not like the way that Dungeons and Dragons had the cleric class in there that used a kind of a pseudo Christianity in there. So he made a healer character that wasn't a Christian monk or something like that. And so there are these kind of things that basically where someone says you're not doing it right, let me do it, and they do it. Or you get good engines like GURPS or Powered by the Apocalypse or Savage Worlds. You get engine systems like that you can put any sort of setting over the top, and those again encourage outside people to create for them. That's why I love Pinnacle and Savage Worlds, is because they love their creators. One of the coolest settings for Savage Worlds is not a Pinnacle setting. It's called Titan Effect, and it's amazing. There's one that I know that it's a pretty hot thing right now. I don't know where it went, but it was called Olympus Inc. And you were basically playing adult demigods, and you guys were in corporate wars and sometimes magical wars behind the scenes and stuff, very much like Percy Jackson. So you can capture the feel of whatever thing you like to read with you can capture that, and it can be done with whatever role-playing game you happen to be good at or enjoy. And that's one thing that Dungeons and Dragons has allowed us to do, is it allowed us to create role-playing games that allowed us to live our fantasies a little bit longer. That's why Star Wars was inevitable. Indiana Jones happened to have come out and have been a crappy role-playing game. It didn't survive. But Star Wars has been around in several iterations, and there was a time where that was the only new Star Wars product out on the market. And those of us who were rabid fans of Star Wars loved it. I can't tell you how cool it was that one night, still living at my dealer's house, that my buddies and I, we sat out in my rooms, and we just chatted for the whole night almost about how Emperor Palpatine came to power and how just the setup to the original trilogy of Star Wars. This was about 1998, so it was still before Episode 1 had even come out, and those were the same friends that went and stood in line for days to get Episode 1 tickets, and some of them even ended up on local news. But wow, what a cool thing! It created a culture. D&D started and created this culture, this multifaceted branching culture that can encompass everything and everyone. And it has made it so people who used to be on the fringes of society, people who didn't feel accepted by their peers, can have a touching point and a talking point with their friends and make friends doing a fun group storytelling thing, bringing us back to the days of sitting around the campfire and having the storyteller or even the whole group tell a great story. So get out there, tell a great story, and be part of this. Join in. If you want to play D&D, play D&D. If you want to play Savage Worlds, play Savage Worlds. If you want to play Index Card RPG, play Index Card RPG. It doesn't matter what you play, as long as everyone at the table is having fun, and we can put aside all of our differences for a while and play the game. Because that's one thing that I was talking about earlier today with a friend of mine. I love Savage Worlds. I do not hate D&D. I might not like the company that's running it, but I do not hate D&D. And role-playing gaming for my life, for me in my life, has been one of the most accepting and loving spaces that I have ever been in. Because all that matters is that you are a good human being. And I've seen people from extreme opposites in political and ideological belief systems put those aside to sit down at a table, and for 3 or 4 hours they're comrades in arms. They're facing off against great dangers. They're building trust, and they're overcoming obstacles in order to win the prize together. So if no one's told you this today, I love you. You're amazing. The world is a more amazing place because you're in it. Stick around. It does get better. And I hope to see you at my table.